Well, hello everyone. I am now finally doing the last chapter of Radicals for Capitalism. And I hope maybe today, but I don't want to promise that, hopefully this week at least, we will start on The Problem of Political Authority, which was the next book we were going to be doing for patrons. But this is the last chapter in Radicals for Capitalism, entitled Epilogue, An Eternal Revolution. And isn't that the truth? Eternal vigilance is the cost of liberty. Now, I wanted to show you, though, all the work I have to do, even when I'm done filming this for you guys. There's just like, I don't know if you can tell all the dog-eared pages that are in here. There are things that I need to extract into Lpedia. There are documents I need to search for. Just various rabbit trails along the way. I think you can probably, no, you can't even hardly, yeah, you can see all right there, maybe. The lighting in here I know is really shitty. Yeah, all the dog-eared pages that I have. They have additional research angles for me. All right, so let's do this. And in this final chapter, it says, libertarians were still radicals, and a country grown comfortable for the most part with the way things are, dominated by a massive middle class doing just fine, for now at least, with the defining elements of American big government such as Social Security. And that unfortunately has been the truth until recently. It says, by plumb line libertarian standards, the world is not getting freer. And that certainly is much more true today than it was when this came out. I think this came out in 2008, if I'm going back. Oh, Brian Dougherty also wrote This is Burning Man. That might be an interesting book to read. I'm trying to look again at the date on this. I'm pretty sure it's 2008. Why can't I find it in the beginning here? I know it was dedicated to his wife. Okay, here we go. Copyright 2007. And he was divorced from Angela Keaton in 2008. And I knew it was right around then because it was dedicated to when he was still married to Angela Keaton. It says, yet, especially if you are a relatively well-off Westerner, it's hard not to see a world that is well worth celebrating, perhaps even reveling in, to the extent that it runs on approximately libertarian principles with a general belief in property rights and the benefits of liberty. This is the neoliberal world that has been seen by pundits and politicians all over the West as dominant since the death of communism. For most people living under it, it's doing a pretty good job of delivering the pursuit of happiness part of the Declaration of Independence, at least. Is it, though? It is within a very narrow confines. I would say for a lot of people it still isn't. In an article entitled, Things Are a Lot Groovier Now, Poole noted that when the magazine was founded in 1968, and I believe we're talking about Reason magazine, Americans lacked such market and personal freedoms such as attaching answering machines to phones or choosing from phone companies. I know we find that weird now. Being able to withdraw cash from a bank out of state or after hours. But is that really freedom? It's certainly convenience. It's certainly technology, but it isn't as if we couldn't do those things before because they were illegal. I mean, some of them may have been, I don't know about out-of-state banking and things like that. But we weren't able to do them just because it wasn't possible. Now, I know there is a freedom through possibility, but when we're talking about libertarianism, I don't think we're merely talking about a freedom because it's now possible, but a freedom because it's allowed, which is just a word that just makes me want to throw up. It says, continuing, earning a free market rate on certificates of deposit, owning gold, enjoying price competition in airfare, staying in hotels as unmarried couples, now that's, and having legal access to contraceptives or home access to porn. Now that's definitely because those things used to be illegal. And we face the draft, 70% marginal income tax rates, a level of socially acceptable discrimination against blacks and women that seem relics of 200 years ago, not just 20. To me, again, that is a matter of moral evolution of people. And I do believe libertarianism is part of that moral evolution. But as I've drawn fire before, libertarianism, qua libertarianism, has nothing to say about that, except for to the fact that through, I guess he talked about social acceptance. So it does, libertarianism definitely has something to say about that it is through social pressures that we get rid of evils, such as, discriminating against people, based upon their race or sexuality. But that's not a legality thing. Again, that's a cultural thing. And I do think libertarianism will bring a cultural revolution as well. Say bans on advertising for doctors and lawyers. The Cold War was raging. Most of Southeast Asia was still third world, and socialism was the governing philosophy in Europe. Whatever troubles we still face from the state, libertarians and all Americans can and should thank both the power and philosophy of free minds and free markets, the magazine's slogan, and a fair description of the larger libertarian message for making life better. Okay, here is a quote. Let me see here. It's been a while since I read this. This is on Cato Institute's website. And it's somebody commenting on the Nobel Prize winning economist James Buchanan. And the quote is, "One thing I'm pretty sure of, though, is that Dr. Buchanan's vision is not shared by most of the American public. While nearly everyone has some beef with government at its many levels, there are very few who would, had they the power, fundamentally change the relationship between government and the governed." And sadly, I believe that is, in fact, an accurate assessment. I'd fundamentally change it. But I realize I'm an outlier. Thus, unless we assume his 3 proposed constitutional amendments are to be imposed by some power outside the American democratic process, by a philosopher king, as it were, reminds me of the king-pilled stuff, we have to imagine a very different world and a very different popular attitude toward what government is expected to accomplish. And I think that may be happening today. They've overplayed their hand. In regard to the old distinction between positive and negative liberty, to freedom to versus freedom from, libertarians have traditionally been on the side of negative. I'm sorry, that is libertarianism. Positive liberty is not libertarianism. That is obligations. It's entitlements. The freedom that merely requires other people to not actively interfere with you. And you want to know what? I think that at one point, I thought this before, then I stopped thinking it, and now I'm going to start thinking it again, that was going to be the battle that the Libertarian Party was going to face. And that if we ever split, that's where the split would come from, is from advocates of mere thin libertarianism, freedom from, and those who advocate a thick, quote-unquote, libertarianism, which includes a liberty to. Lately, some libertarians, Reason Magazine's current editor Nick Gillespie, the most prominent, have stressed that technological advances and even the constrained market freedom we now enjoy have created a range of positive freedoms worth celebrating, freedoms that make the lack of certain paper negative freedoms. I don't like the way you dismiss that as paper negative freedoms. These paper negative freedoms have real-world consequences that don't exist merely on paper. Easier to ignore. In an essay on Reason's website, he floats the heresy that the places rated best to live based on calculations of economic regulation levels by free market think tank Pacific Research Institute, founded by Anthony Fisher, aren't the places most people really want to live in. The economic freedom metric may be pretty far down the list, if not quite irrelevant to what drives most people's and businesses' decisions about where to hang out. Because businesses like, not all businesses, I'm trying to word this in the fairest possible way, quite a few businesses like regulations because it keeps down the competition. So, of course, they're going to go to a place where there is regulation that they can afford and others can't, as long as they can still maintain their market share. Yes, regulations are always and everywhere too high. On the margin, higher taxes are a bad thing. But the margins aren't the whole ball of wax, and the folks at the Pacific Research Institute are unlikely to be tricking en masse to Kansas, which came in number 1 in its Economic Freedom Index, anytime soon. Why is that? Because most of the time, economic freedom's just another word for nothing else to do. There are other metrics other than economic freedom. Yeah, people will tolerate, for say, living in a big city like New York. We're talking pre-COVID. COVID had changed everything because of the other things there are to do, the other things there are to see, the culture. That's easy to say if you aren't trying to run your own business. You don't deal in or consume substances the government says can't be sold or consumed. Your property hasn't been claimed by eminent domain. You are not being investigated by the IRS. You are not an Iraqi, Branch Davidian, or other victim of U.S. bombs or bullets. Says the latest, and now he's going to go on to talk about the Free State Project, but I think this is definitely dated information, and the Free State Project is not the failure, if I remember correctly what he's going to say, that he tries to paint it as here. I really would love to move there. I've become more and more wanting to move there, but, Wayne's roots are placed here deeply in Colorado. And unless Colorado really goes to shit, I don't see us moving to anywhere other than Wyoming. The latest attempt to achieve a libertarian Zion, gathering libertarians together in one place to build a libertarian polity, is known as the Free State Project. Project organizers decided that 20,000 libertarian political activists could turn New Hampshire into libertarian paradise if they moved en masse, but have hit a wall of about 7,300 interested parties after a few years of proselytizing in the libertarian community, most effectively on the web. They years ago now hit the 20,000 and are in full bloom. I don't think at the time of this writing, Brian thought they would ever hit the 20,000, but they have. This is likely because modern American libertarians' complaints about the state are, for the most part, more ideological and principled than based in experienced tyranny in their day-to-day lives. It's not true anymore, is it? Okay, I'm going to stop this part of the recording here. I like recording these in little breaks, but I put them together, but it's time to go to the platform committee meeting. But just as a little, if you're stopping midway through this video, we've got about 40 more pages of just little tidbits left. So I'll see you in a few. So as you can tell, this is a different day that I'm continuing this summary. I didn't get to finish it that one day. So it says the next title that we were at here, it says, "You libertarians are the types that would allow fornication in public parks." And then the answer being, what do you mean, public parks? Which I think is really funny, because that's immediately what I thought. It says, "If you are a libertarian, there are plenty such who thinks the Iraq war is properly libertarian." Okay. Then you'd find them, and I'm trying to figure out who the them refers back to, pretty much solidly libertarian all the time. And I think it's talking about magazines such as Reason, or maybe some of the ones that some of us don't find to be completely, purely libertarian on some issues. But the reason I highlighted this wasn't to refer back to certain institutions at the time of the writing of this book. Just the idea that there were, quote-unquote, plenty such libertarians who thought the Iraq war was properly libertarian. My God, that makes me want to throw up. It says, academics continue research of vital interest to libertarians into the nature of private property and how dispute resolution and law have not historically needed a monopoly state to function, and how prisoner's dilemma and game theory show that intelligent humans can reach a workable, ordered social equilibrium without outside compulsion. It says the Kelo decision, that's the eminent domain decision, the little pink house, also inspired a well-publicized bit of ideological guerrilla theater as objectivist libertarian Logan Darrow Clements launched a public campaign to take Supreme Court Justice David Souter's New Hampshire home through eminent domain in order to build the Lost Liberty Hotel. The most substantial success for the movement on the surface is not that every longtime movement hand tells of more and more people who not only know what libertarian is, but profess to be libertarian without it being either their profession or a major hobby or obsession. So basically saying that there's actual people who are just libertarians. They're not professional libertarians. They're not celebritarians. They're just libertarians. And that is one of the most notable successes of the movement. I find that to be a very interesting observation. It says, but while a hypothetical young libertarian may think that certain regulatory agencies, such as the FDA and the Justice Department's Antitrust Division, ought to exist, even if they are overly active and not always overly smart, just as those who remain true to liberal principles of the 19th century had to change their name to adjust changing fashions and the meaning of the term liberal, so might libertarians of the Rothbard variety have to reconstitute themselves as classical libertarians in the 21st century. And I have one thing to say to that. Come and take it, bitches. No. No, no. You guys come up with a new name. Not probably anybody in my patron audience, but no, I will fight for the word libertarian. But it may in fact be true. Language does what language does. The movement whose history I've told in this volume may be losing its monopoly on the term libertarian. I think that's not in fact the case. That might have been true at the time of the writing of this, but I haven't seen that in my time. The general approach to politics that can be loosely defined as LPers and Cato types sometimes do when explaining themselves to non-ideologically savvy audiences as socially liberal and fiscally conservative, a term you guys know I hate, has hit the big time. As libertarian scholar Tom Palmer of the Cato Institute noted, it is not unusual that in conversations with strangers at the gym, if politics or occupation comes up, he'll be informed that, hey, I'm a libertarian too. I actually think it's going to be the Cato types, that are going to have to come up with a new term, to be honest with you. And I think they will reclaim the term classical liberal. And I think that's probably the best outcome here. If that person actually read Mises, Rothbard, or Friedman and came to understand that a consistent and full libertarian view means disbelief in antitrust law or the FDA, he might reconsider that self-identification. And that is true, and why I don't believe we should be lying to people about what we actually believe. R.J. Smith notes that it used to be if you met a fellow libertarian, they were truly libertarian. They had read everything and knew everything, and now everybody's a libertarian and no one reads anything. It's just astounding. Ask them the most basic book, they've never read it. I'm just a libertarian. This may make them seem like posers to old school warriors like Smith, with his memories of Rothbard's living room, Lefebvre's Freedom School, the sitting room at Fee's Irvington Mansion, working at Cato's first D.C. row house headquarters, and helping develop the early theory and practice of resource and species conservation through private property. But it's a victory from a movement. Is it? I don't believe it is. And that's kind of why I'm on the Mises train, because I don't think they think it is either. We're looking to reclaim the term and the movement. And you don't have to be a supporter of the Mises Caucus to agree. I know a lot of my friends and supporters are not. I'm just telling you why I am and what I see. You know I don't require my friends to agree with me on everything. From a term that no one understood or trusted to an acceptable, sometimes even glamorous option for identity. So, redefining the term is a victory for the term. What are we, just talking about victory for words here? Or for actual concepts? I don't know. This last chapter showed me some of my deep disagreements with Brian Dougherty. And he and I are friends. I like Reason Magazine. I'm not one of the people who call them Treason Magazine. But I can see, you know, there's a gulf. There's a bit of gulf of how I see libertarianism to sometimes how he might see libertarianism. But I'm also not the kind of divisive person that's going to throw someone out of the movement. As I've said multiple times, I don't think people are libertarian. I think ideas are, and you judge each idea individually. And if one person happens to have enough libertarian ideas, then they're a libertarian. Usually people are libertarian on some things and not libertarian on others. It says, opposing the state has become an industry. If only. I guess there is a cottage industry in it, but not big enough for my tastes. And going back there, he's doing some recollections here. He says, we prided ourselves, Eberling remembers, on making a point of focusing on every challenging and cutting-edge issue, and to be so principled and uncompromising that we eventually would drive away every conceivable reader. And I looked at Bumper, and Bumper being Jacob Hornberger, and said, I'll be working on so offending you that you're going to leave too. Eberling was kidding, but only kind of. But it's funny, Starchild used to say something like this, and I think there's some value in it. Not in taking it hyper literally. Obviously, you're not looking to be so just repulsive that you're repulsive in ideas, that you're driving everyone out of the movement, and you're not sufficiently libertarian unless you've drawn a circle around yourself and you're the only standing libertarian. But what Starchild used to say to me is that he would love the LP to be so principled and so uncompromising on principles that he would be considered a marginal libertarian. And if you know Starchild, he's a hardcore libertarian. But that was like his desire. And as far as I know, that still remains his particular point of view. All right, we're going to take another break. I'll probably have another costume change when you see me come back. Okay, I am back. And as I said, a costume change. All right, let's continue. The next title is There is no mass constituency for 7-year-old heroin dealers to be able to buy tanks with their profits from prostitution. Au contraire. No, just joking. There probably isn't a market for it. Good thing that's a straw man. The Libertarian Party's status in the larger libertarian intellectual and activist movement has become a side stream, though some LP devotees would say the rest of the movement is the insignificant sideshow. I don't know of anybody in the LP, devotee or otherwise, that would say that. I think most of us are pretty embarrassed by the fact that most libertarians, and we're not talking about the Beltway libertarians like Cato, want nothing to do with the LP, and we would like to see that changed. Many LP activists and candidates are far more likely than in the party's beginnings to know only the LP side of the larger libertarian movement. LP advocates could point to the fact that the LP has received far more votes than any libertarian magazine has had readers, or think tank has had donors or customers. Well, and the comparison would be silly because they're trying to do two totally different things. Still, the days when major libertarian academic intellectuals such as, can't pronounce that, Zaz and Nozick would show up at LP conventions merely as interested parties, delegates, or platform members are over. Not true. Stefan Kinsella, Tom Woods, Dave Smith. I guess you don't consider them major, I guess, quote-unquote, academic intellectuals. I would certainly consider Tom Woods one. I would certainly consider Stefan Kinsella one. Dave Smith is more of a popular libertarian thinker. A fresh, purely political class has dominated the LP since the 90s. Now that is mostly true, and that's to our detriment. The political class has resulted in the absolutely corrupt LNC of this term. A huge disjunction often exists between them and the intellectual books, think tanks, and magazines part of the movement, spurred by a general sense of embarrassment for many of those who see themselves as the serious professional libertarians about the LP. LPers often sense that contempt, so resentment often runs back. We need to fix this. But if fixing it means becoming beltway libertarians like Cato, no thank you. It's an irresistible temptation for libertarians who should know better to centrally plan the larger movement or be uncharitable to those who pick strategies, techniques, and audiences for their libertarian activism that seem foolish or counterproductive or hopeless, and I agree. You do you, boo-boo, as I said. David Bergland, a 1984 LP presidential candidate who returned to chair the LP National Committee in the late 1990s, has harsh words for fellow libertarians who question the efficacy or even the sanity of LP activism as a major outlet for world-changing effort. If I'm told I have the burden of proving to you that I'm not wasting my time, well, fuck off. Actually, he says, well, fuck you. You can quote me on that. And I would agree with Mr. Bergland there. The Libertarian Party may have reached an impasse of sorts. It never again approached Ed Clark's near million votes on the presidential level in 1980. Of course, that's no longer true. And it holds no federal or state congressional seats. That is no longer true. After a heyday in New Hampshire in the mid-1990s when there were 4 libertarians in the state house. A few old party activists think that seeing the LP as something meant to win office inherently sells out libertarian principle. I'm not an old party activist, but I think if you see it that as its only function, you have sold out libertarian principle. But I don't think very many people see it as only that. There are some who do, and I argue with them all the time. Gary Greenberg, one of the founders of the New York State LP and its 1978 gubernatorial candidate, thinks that the very idea of worrying about the LP becoming a major force is essentially selling out because hardcore libertarianism has no mass constituency. And if you are constantly covering it up, you are playing games. Agree with him on that. I do think we could reach a point of mass constituency. We don't have it yet. But you don't get there by hiding the ball on what you believe. And that's where the quote comes from. He goes, there's no mass constituency for 7-year-old heroin dealers to be able to buy tanks with their profits from prostitution. And once you face that, the LP has to decide, are they compromising their principles for votes, or are they running candidates for the opportunity to educate people? Others in the party think that there's no point in having an LP that doesn't stand staunchly for a pure libertarian position. I'm probably one of them. There isn't a point in having a libertarian party unless you're going to be libertarian. That the other 2 parties have plenty of room for people who mostly believe in freedom except for this or that, or what about this or that. By that line of thinking, if the LP just becomes Republican light, why should anyone bother voting for it since the Republican Party already exists? I would agree. And if people want a centrist party, let them form one. Next chapter or subchapter title is, Since crime we have always had with us and the state is just organized crime, we will always have the state. The history of libertarian movement strategy is one of alternate, often conflicting strategic imperatives delivered with oracular assurance. Chris Sayabera, the dialectical libertarian philosopher, thinks that Hayek's most valuable idea is that government interventionism shifts the psychology of the culture toward an unlovely dependence. I like that sentence. It's a very well written sentence. And the phrase, an unlovely dependence. That's very poignant. A realization of the dangers that authoritarian structures create even outside government, particularly the danger that free and open communication gets stifled as people strive to tell the boss only what they think he wants to hear, has animated libertarian thinkers from Liberty Fund founder Pierre Goodrich to science fiction writer Robert Anton Wilson. And he goes on to show how libertarian ideas can achieve mass constituency when separated from the entire package. And I would agree there that we have yet to really fully leverage issue coalitions in the strength that they can be leveraged. Another quote here is, if you are going to preserve something for the ages, you must preserve it in its purest form. But then goes on to say, you won't convince any agency to change the way they do airport screening by talking about the illegitimacy of taking one's income from taxpayers at the point of a gun. But where the ideological passion is important, Pool of the Reason Foundation realizes, is in inspiring people to do the research and thinking that will convince the non-ideological to come along. And I like this paragraph because it shows the value of both. But I think it's funny how just a few pages before, it talked about the foolishness of thinking you can essentially plan how liberty is going to come about, while here it basically categorically says you can't convince any agency of this by X. Are you trying to centrally plan something here, Mr. Poole? It says, nowadays, Carpenter and Cato have no use for the more radical conclusions of a thoroughgoing anarcho-libertarian foreign policy, which is why I have no use, pretty much. There's some things I still go to them for. I will not completely rule out any source of information, but it's why I, as a general rule, have no use for Cato. I believe they have sold their soul. I love this sentence. No one is better equipped to complain about how annoying libertarians can be than another libertarian. That should be the theme of the movement. And it's now looking towards the future, and I agree here. The era of private escape from the planet has officially begun. It may turn out to be the most important thing that has ever happened for libertarianism. I agree there. Making visible headway in Washington political circles for libertarian ideas is not the right way to think about it, Rosetta says. It's like wondering how to restructure the horseshoe industry to fit with the arrival of the automobile. Their era is not the new era. We still have these constructs in our minds that are historical rather than forward-looking and have yet to fully disabuse ourselves of them, but we must and we will. Quintessentially, I can never pronounce this word. Essentially and metaphysically, Murray Rothbard once wrote, the libertarian should remain of good cheer. The eventual victory of liberty is inevitable because only liberty is functional for modern man. There is no need, therefore, for libertarians to thirst maniacally, God, I'm not pronouncing things right today, for instant action and instant victory, and then to fall into bleak despair when that instant victory is not forthcoming. Reality, and therefore history, is on our side. And that's the way the book ends. And now I've got all that follow-up work to do, but we will be starting on a new book. It's been wonderful going through this with you.